Hello, everybody, and welcome to Infamous Interviews at Infamous Horror. Today, I am joined by Kalaisan Kalaichelvan. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Right.
that's good.
And he's a Canadian film composer. So, how did you get into the business of being a film composer?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up with a lot of music in my household, just growing up with there was a lot of music in my family and my parents, and I grew up with a background in classical piano and some classical music training. And we really loved movies back at our house, so there was a big culture of like going to the AFI movie list and I just loved music in the films. And eventually basically people knew I needed to tended to nerd out about it. So I had friends and colleagues who did film and theater who would ask me to start writing things for them. And that sort of started blowing up and snowballing and eventually led to certain opportunities and um where I ended up with the Sundance Film Festival as one of their composer fellows and doing a residency at the Canadian Film Center and here I am now just writing music for movies and things.
Wow, that's exciting. And how did you get involved with In Flames? Because this seems to be an interesting project as well.
For sure, yeah. In Flames, the directors are Khan and I met at the Canadian Film Center. We were both in residency at the same time. So I was one of the composer residents and he was one of the directors there. And we didn't get to work together during that time at the CFC, but we got along really well. We happened to just like and share a lot of similar tastes in film and get excited about a lot of similar things. And I was really excited about the work he was doing, and I think he was interested in what I was doing. And we used to just do movie nights and things like that. And then sometime later, after we had left the CFC, he reached out to me about his first feature, and he said, would you take a chance at looking at the script and see what you think?" And I read it, and it was fantastic and phenomenal. And he asked me if I'd be interested in working on it, and I couldn't say no because he's such a talented filmmaker and it's such a fantastic piece of film, and we kind of got started from there.
So, unfortunately, I have not seen In Flames yet, but what can you tell us about what makes In Flames so special?
Yeah, so In Flames is a horror genre film that's set in Karachi, Pakistan, and it basically looks at a daughter, Mariam, and her mother, and they've lost their family patriarch, and now you see these two women sort of navigate the really complex patriarchal systems and structures of Karachi and what it's like to be a woman in that context, while being sort of haunted by sort of these spirits that are both real and imagined, and that's something you see in the film. But it's really interesting as a film because it sort of uses the genre of horror as a vessel to examine, right,
Right.
the
Yeah.
society and these relationships and how 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 difficult it is to be a woman in this context and even human in that sense. And it does it with such a precise incisive eye, and it's really deeply compelling as drama, and it's also just terrifying both as a horror film but also the very reality of it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
And you know what? That's what I love about the genre as well, because once you look at the films, it's kind of like an onion. There are so many layers and layers you can peel off it, and you can get more the more you view it each time, too.
totally. Yeah, and that's why it's such an interesting time, especially for horror now. Like it's such an exciting and expansive genre. There's so much you can say with it, um, while staying true to what the roots of horror is. And that's where we're seeing so many different kinds of those films, right? Between
Right.
like the found footage stuff to like the Ari Aster Egger stuff. Like there's so much out there, and it's such a cool time, I think, to be making and watching horror films. Like,
Right. It is. It almost feels like, going back to the grindhouse days. It's like everybody's
yeah,
doing it yourself, kind of getting in there, like kind of like Robert Rodriguez and Tarantino did in the 90s. It seems like this new generation is kind of picking up that steam again.
totally. And I think it's cool, right? Because like I'm seeing this now, like a lot of young filmmakers are using horror as a base to like make their first films with, right? And it's like it's I think speaking to what you're saying, like it's now a compelling place to start and get really hands-on and play with the medium, which maybe wasn't quite so much a thing 10, 15 years ago, but seeing that come back and seeing everyone's unique take on it is really cool. Yeah, it's pretty neat, man.
And when you were making the music for In Flames, how was the conversations like between you and the director about how he wanted the music, or the ideas of you wanted to place the music in a certain way?
Yeah, I mean, it was a pretty iterative conversation. Like he brought me on really early on before he started shooting. First we just sort of talked about the script, and sort of like some of the sound ideas he had and how I responded to it. And there was like one bit in the screenplay that sort of talks about how the lead character is sort of hearing um the sound of the waves and then the sound of this truck that kept getting louder and louder in her head. And it was like this very vivid description. And I found that really interesting. And I was like, let's play with that. And so I would send them sort of these sounds of like these conch horns, which are like these seashells, and that's
Right.
often used a lot in parts of South Asia. And I was just playing around with them and send him some recordings, and he kind of really dug it because it started when you play them in interesting ways and start layering them and distorting them, it creates these really interesting textures that almost sound like distorted traffic. Uh, and that's such a big part of like the space and what Karachi as a city is like, right? There's always so much sound happening and like so many sensory, like overwhelming to a certain point. So I kind of started sending him these sounds and he started thinking about it. And then he asked, like, can you write like a 5 minute piece so that I can play on set? And I created this sketch that was sort of like this recurring theme about how Mariam is haunting. Like it was almost like this sonic trigger that can keep bringing those ghosts back in a sound kind of way. Uh, and he really loved it. They played it on set and stuff, and that became like the bedrock of what we built the score on. Um, and then since then, we'd like, he would send some recordings that he had on set, and I would send him some of my own like recordings from my time in South Asia and stuff. And I would start building these little sketches and things and send him sometimes themes. And we would do a lot of back and forth over the year until I finally got to see a cut like of the whole film. And that's when it was really cool process because at that point we had all these ingredients, we had all these things we had tried and experimented with. And now it's like, cool, let's try and now set it to the film and play around with it. And like where would the theme for Mariam suit and where would it not? And where do we want to evoke? It's kind of like what Jaws does, right?
Right. Yeah.
When you have the classic EF, the
Speaking
two
of which, I
notes.
don't know if you can see the
I
poster
see
behind.
it there. Yeah, you've got some great films up there, man. Uh, but it's almost like being very deliberate about that theme, that motif is the monster, right? It is
Right.
Bruce the shark. It is the ghost. So like it's being very deliberate about when to use it, when to hold off on it. Uh, when can we cheat the audience into a scare when there isn't one necessarily? So like there's so much to learn from something like Jaws about that. So when we had this conch motif, this horn motif thing, initially we were just like, it's so cool, let's throw it everywhere. And then we're like, wait, let's dial it back. Like, how do we reserve the good scares? How do we use it to
Right.
be suggestion? Versus not always being on all the time. And that was something we learned over just different edits and different versions of the film before we landed on its rhythm. And that was really cool. And so there would be moments like that, and there'd be moments that are more like character driven and like what's the point of view we're hitting, right? Like what is Mariam hearing? What is she feeling? And how does the music support that and not overwhelm it?
And I'm going to put you on the spot here with you being so into music and being a composer. What are some of your favorite movie scores of all time?
Oh, that's a tough one. Yeah, it's hard to answer always when I get this because like film music is so huge
Yeah.
and there's so many different kinds of music. But all right, well, it's like asking what your favorite movie is, and I always
Yeah,
hate that
right. Yeah.
question too. But yeah,
And
I
it's
mean,
always fluid, right? Like it can change.
it's always changing, right? So like I know like one of the fundamental scores that changed my life as a kid, as someone when I was younger, was like the Lord of the Rings. That was massive for me. Just like the first time I'm like, music sparks imagination and it can do all those things. And it's still an inspiration to me. And then lots of John Williams,
Oh yeah.
huge, huge, huge. I think
And
even
I
my
think
favorite John,
2001: A Space Odyssey has to be up there as well.
massive. All of that is obviously great classical music, and that's where I like learned about Ligeti and Katachturian, and there's so much great and Strauss, of course, so much great music there. And then like now like a big influences were like Johnny Greenwood and like films like There Will Be Blood,
Yeah.
um, which is a phenomenal score and a game changer.
I
And
think one
Johan
of my
Johansson.
more recent favorites, sorry to interrupt you, but
Yeah, go for it.
one of my more recent ones is probably Sunshine and The Social Network as well.
That's the Social Network's such a great one. Like, think about how you blend genres and it feels like such a part of the texture of that world. Uh, I hands down, and that was like their first film score,
Yeah.
Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, and I love Nine Inch Nails, so it's great. Yeah, that's a really great one. I don't know if you know like Johan Johansson, like so the early
Oh yeah.
Denis Villeneuve movies,
I love his scores.
Prisoners,
Sicario, Mandy.
insane. Mandy's awesome.
Mandy's
Great film
mind
too.
blowing to listen to, especially when you're driving and you just put that score on.
Yeah, man. It's like he sort of taught me about like how you can make something feel like so massive and out of this world, right? Like his perception for sound as music is so interesting. And he just, he passed away just too soon. It's a
Yeah.
real shame.
Like after he finished the score of Mandy, and I think they forgot to submit it in for consideration too.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
was a big deal on the internet when that came out too.
There were, yeah, he had some like I remember even like Arrival, which is such a great score.
Yeah.
It got disqualified from the Oscars. It was so stupid because they played that Max Richter piece in the movie, and that's an existing piece of music. It was really dumb
That's
because that
because
score
that
is,
happens a lot in a lot of movies too.
and the Oscar rules are always dumb, right? They always
Yeah.
flip-flop depending on the year. So it's such a shame because that score, now I see so many scores influenced by that, and they try to do that thing with the voices and the textures in that way. And that's one of the he was such a great light in the music industry.
Right.
And
And
Thomas
another
Newman was big too,
yeah.
for me.
And
But
another one of my favorites, of course, is it's obvious, but Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
I was just gonna say
It was
that's my favorite
re-released in
Williams.
Dolby Cinema like a few years ago, and my dad caught it in Dolby Cinema with the new Dolby Atmos track, and it was just amazing.
It's bonk. That's might be my favorite John Williams. It's either that or AI, which is a great one too. But
Yeah, AI
like
is great.
so good. But like that film, it sounds like a horror film at some times,
Yeah,
and then it sounds like this astounding, like the beautiful ending, and like it plays with these genres so well, right? Like the opening of it is iconic. Like that like microtonal like crescendo into the credits is like insane. And of course, like the first time the boy opens the door, like all that music is just that film is also brilliant
yeah,
and so like peak Spielberg,
yeah. I
which
do, and
gets lost.
I also feel like it's underlooked in his filmography as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it always gets lost in like the ETs and the
Yeah,
Indiana Jones, which I get, but like that was also a time where like I think before Spielberg, who's been great for a long time, but before he became this uber commercial like
right.
Hollywood director, there's like still all these art house sensibilities to Close Encounters, while
Yeah,
being a mainstream movie that that's so cool. And like the classic Spielberg face shots are just iconic in that movie. Like um that's a great one. Great choice, man. It's a really good one. I also like love um old school Morricone, like The Thing.
oh yeah,
Um and like all those, like he had all these weird ass
He's
cool
one of
like
my
guitar
favorites as well.
riffs.
Yeah.
Um, and you see them like pop up in like new Tarantino movies and stuff like that. Where like, man, that was some good stuff.
Yeah, like the
Uh,
Hateful Eight. Yeah.
yeah, which had I think one of the unused cues from the thing in there. It's the Beast,
Yes.
which is like a great cue. Uh, yeah. I even think like if we're talking like old stuff, like uh, I was into like the Goldsmith, the Omen scores.
Yeah.
Which the whole obvious a ton, like it's hokey, it's pulpy, but it's also like really fun horror music. Like you don't really get horror music like that anymore. Like everything's very intense and thing, but like there was a time where horror music could be really fun, um which was fun. There's a lot of great music out there, man. Like the
Yeah.
history and of film music is just so vast, um and there's so much you can keep digging into and learning from all the time.
And one last question for you. What's next for you after In Flames?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things in the works right now. So I'm in the middle of like wrapping up my debut EP that's about to come out,
Oh,
and
cool.
it's kind of a cool work that sort of brings in electronics and field recordings, but also strings in interesting ways that I'm looking forward to putting out. Right now I've got some film stuff that's coming up that I can't speak too much to yet, but I'm excited about it. And then also I write concert music, so I've got a couple of commissions. I'm working on this exciting project for 20 pianos and electronics, and uh, a couple of things coming up. It's an exciting year ahead.
Well, thank you so much for joining us at Infamous Interviews and Infamous Art. It's been real fun and congratulations.